So what was the next question?
The next one is about, that was about morality, moral question. The first one was what can I do to help? Because I'm very lucky, what can I do to help in the world? And the other one was about what is the moral way of evolutionary enlightenment? What does morality mean?
So who was the person?
It was two persons and joined the two questions together.
So maybe we can hear the questions again, please.
The question again. Yes. Well, it's because I realizing that I'm living in a very privileged part of the world, and what?
I remember now. I remember.
Yeah.
And what was I got it.
My question was about morality in moral action in the context of evolutionary enlightenment. That morality or moral actions, what does it mean in an evolutionary perspective?
The mic doesn't work.
Does it work now?
Yeah.
Better? Okay. What would be a moral action, moral actions in an evolutionary context with an evolutionary perspective?
Okay, very good. So basically, in response to these two questions, enlightenment is about going from small self to big self, or relative self to absolute self. And I described it a few minutes ago as going from 49 to 51%. Small self or relative self to absolute self, enlightened self. Okay? So it's a shift of identity. That's fundamentally a shift of identity, a fundamental shift of identity. In what I call the traditional enlightenment, the traditional Eastern enlightenment is about transcendence. It's about being, transcending the mind, transcending time, transcending the body, transcending the world, going beyond, awakening to timeless, formless being. So the traditional enlightenment is the enlightenment of transcendence. And generally speaking, the expression of enlightenment in the world has been and continues to be compassionate action. Christians who have some Christian enlightenment, right? A Christian who has a Christian enlightenment is more identified with the love of Christ than they are with their own egos, right? An enlightened Christian is more identified with the love of Jesus, with the love for Jesus, and the surrender to His love than they are identified with their own psychological self, right? Not my will be done, but thy will be done, right? Not my will, but thy will. So that's surrender of the ego, surrender of the personal will.
It surrenders.
I'm glad. So in the East, there in the Eastern Enlightenment. So the expression, for example, of enlightenment within a Christian context is love your neighbor, and Christians, as a whole, are the most compassionate religion in the world. If you go all over the world in places where there's real wretched poverty and suffering, there's more Christians that are trying to alleviate pain and suffering in the world than any other religious group. And I think much more than Buddhists. Buddhists don't hardly do anything. Well, I'm saying because it's interesting, because Buddhism is the religion of compassion. But also in India, like India's most famous gurus, like Jaggi Vasudev, who's one of the most popular gurus in India today, or Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, who's one of the most popular gurus in India today, or Amici, who's one of the most popular gurus in India today. These gurus have vast networks of social work that they're doing in India and in other places in the world. So they teach enlightenment, and they get huge amounts of money as donations, and they put this money towards extraordinary amounts of social work, alleviating suffering for poor people. They have all kinds of projects and building hospitals. I mean, what a lot of these most popular gurus in India are doing at the level of social work is awe-inspiring. It's amazing. It's unbelievable. It's fantastic. It's incredible. You follow? So in traditional enlightenment, the expression of enlightenment in the world is compassionate action. And compassionate action is relieving pain and suffering. You follow? So the expression of enlightenment in the world has usually been through compassionate action. Compassionate action is relieving pain and suffering in the world. Follow? In evolutionary enlightenment, which is a new form of enlightenment that never existed before, it only emerged, I said, 200 years ago with the discovery of evolution. Biological evolution, cultural evolution, and cosmic evolution led to this understanding of the interior of evolution, which is consciousness, the evolution of consciousness. When you look at the evolution of consciousness as it relates to the understanding of cosmic evolution, biological evolution, cultural evolution, you realize there's a telos, or a directionality, or a drive in the universe that's going towards the future. The universe is being driven or compelled by an impulse, the evolutionary impulse, which is going towards the future. So there's a drive in the universe that's going towards the future. There's a drive in the creative process that's going towards the future. So in evolutionary spirituality and in evolutionary enlightenment, the expression of enlightened awareness in the world is the commitment to create the conditions that will make it possible for something that never existed before, that's better than what exists now, to manifest. So in evolutionary enlightenment and evolutionary spirituality, the expression of compassion is not to heal the wounds and suffering of the world, but it's the commitment to create the conditions that make it possible for something that never existed before to come into the world. So evolutionary spirituality is future-oriented. It's to give rise to something that never existed before. It's a very specific motivation. I'm interested in what's possible, not what is. I'm interested in the possible, not what is. So the expression of compassion in an evolutionary enlightenment is to give rise to the possible. And the possible in an evolutionary orientation is that which never has existed before. So, what can you do here in Denmark in the back? A lot. This, huh? Well, now you're making my job hard. What I'm saying is, if we realize that the problem, were you here last night? The fellow in the back, were you here last night? Well, basically, the problem in Denmark is that you're the luckiest people on the planet. What?
Who said so?
Me? You're the luckiest people on the planet. You're the luckiest people probably that have ever existed since human beings stood up on two legs. Because of your wealth, your privilege, your education, your extremely enlightened, liberal democracy, which gives you so many rights and freedoms and supports education and women's rights, you have the most enlightened government, system of government in the world. The life conditions in this country are unbelievably amazing. This is heaven on earth. Literally, not metaphor. Go anywhere else you want. Go to my country. It's not like Denmark. You'll be hard-pressed to find anywhere in the world that is as nice and as liberal and as supporting of human rights and freedoms and women's rights, that is so egalitarian and fair.
So
Well,
what,
just a minute. Where the standard of living is so high and the opportunities are infinite, as in Denmark. You might find it, if you go to Sweden or, Norway or Holland, it'll be similar. But Scandinavia is a very fortunate place to be. So the problem in Denmark is the luckiest people that have ever been born don't know that they're the luckiest people that have ever been born, don't feel lucky, don't act lucky, don't think they're lucky. That's the problem with Denmark. The luckiest people in the world don't know, recognize, realize, or appreciate how lucky they are. Because as I've been saying the last few nights when I was teaching here in Denmark, that if you are lucky, which you are, you should feel lucky. But if you are lucky and don't feel lucky, that's the definition of a pathology, right? If you are lucky, objectively lucky, but you don't feel lucky, that's the definition of a pathology, right? That means you're somehow in denial of reality. So in relationship to the answer to the question, what you want to be interested in is how, what are the next steps at the level of culture for this country? And what can you do in your own field to help to take the next step? I've always felt, it's been one of my own idea, kind of a fantasy, our own idea, that the luckiest people in the world should take responsibility for where culture is headed. In Scandinavia, culture is fairly homogeneous. You know what I mean? It's fairly homogeneous. In America, it's not very homogeneous. America is like, we have all these different cultures. East Coast, West Coast, North, South. There's all these different levels of cultural development, all these different kinds of people. A lot of crazy people, a lot of very smart people. We love guns. America's a very complex place. It's really crazy, and it's not very homogeneous, and it's full of problems. But in Scandinavia, you guys are very homogeneous. So just think what would be possible if you all actually felt, wow, we're the luckiest people that have ever been born in the history of the human experiment. And because we're so lucky, it's up to us to take responsibility for where the human race is headed. Why? Because you're so lucky. Who else's responsibility should it be if it shouldn't be yours? The reason it should be yours is because you're the most fortunate. So it would make sense that the most fortunate should take responsibility for the next step, for where we're all going. That's my idea anyway. Now, what the answer to that's going to mean in relationship to all different elements of culture, I don't exactly know, but that's up to you and us to figure out together. But the question is, if your attitude is, it's up to me to take responsibility for where we're going, as best I can, within my own field of engagement and endeavor, that's a lot. And imagine if everybody was trying to do that. If everybody was trying to take responsibility for what's possible and for the future within their own field of expertise, that would be very exciting. And if everybody was trying to do that and if everybody felt that responsible, instead of everybody feeling victimized and hard done by and overwhelmed and lost and confused. That would be a big shift, don't you think? Right?
Can I ask something?
Well, I have to answer all the questions first. So if we have time, then I'm happy to. Okay, next.
So how to become an individual, dependent, and at the same time connected?
Who asked that question?
Well, I think that part of the discussion has helped me to answer to get a reply to that question. But there's still one aspect that I'm wondering about, and that is, well, if you are, if you see yourself as a person trying to think your own thoughts and trying to have your own value system, not something you get from your parents or from, people around you. I come to think, do you think that what some people call the inner voice, is that the evolutionary drive?
No. No, first of all, no. But first of all, look, maybe your parents were enlightened people.
Yeah.
So maybe your parents were right. And maybe your teachers were right. And maybe your culture's right. So I'm not saying that they're necessarily wrong, but the question is, do we make our own ideas our own? So for example, even with my own teaching, I like my own students to question my own teachings. Because if people just accept the teachings as being great, then they won't make them their own. To make something your own, you have to question, is this really as true as I think it is?
Yes.
And you have to be willing to doubt it in order to find out, is it really true? And so I'm saying maybe your parents were right, maybe your teachers were right, and maybe your culture's right, but maybe not. The question is, it's not that they're necessarily wrong, but have we gone through a process of inquiry where we've questioned everything for ourselves?
Yeah, right.
That's the point.
But if I can just come in, then you say yourself. But having listened to the conversation, then yourself, if you're an evolutionary, yourself is, well, what do I say, the evolution itself.
So yourself is a combination of everything that's come before. Ourselves are a combination of all that's come before.
And what you're about to become as well.
Yes, certainly.
Right, but I still feel it's very difficult to grasp this idea of self.
Well, the self is very complex,
Exactly.
multidimensional.
That's right.
For sure it's difficult, I agree with you. But I'm just saying, are our own ideas, have we made them our own through going through a process of inquiry?
Right.
We don't want to reject everything just because someone else told us.
No, that's true.
You
All
see,
right.
because
That would
maybe
be too easy.
maybe they were right,
Yeah.
but we want to go through it to make it our own. That's the idea.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Two more left. So the next one is about your third tenet, face everything and avoid nothing in relationship to culture.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know if you remember it, but I actually think you have answered most of it.
Oh, good.
It was just when you face everything and avoid nothing, when you see it, when you look upon our culture, what do you see? What do you see, and what would you share?
What do I see where?
In our culture? And
Danish culture?
I think you already answered it, actually,
Oh, good.
just 10 minutes ago.
Okay. Thank you. So what was the next one?
It was about being partners and not to become bridges, to support each other, how to support each other.
Oh, well then you should leave each other alone.
Leave each other alone?
Yeah. I don't think it's good for couples to get too much into. In my ideal if people are in a couple, a romantic relationship, the goal is to leave each other alone. Not to pick at each other.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I think in a relationship with someone else, we want to feel safe. And so to me, the basis of a good romantic or sexual relationship is that you trust the other person. So if you trust the other person trusts you, that becomes the foundation for safety. And if you trust the other person, then you can leave them alone. And if they trust you, they can leave you alone. Now, that doesn't mean if there's problems, if some problems come up, then you need to work them out. But there's a difference between working out problems and actually picking at each other.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
But to me, at least in the way I think about it, the goal in a good relationship between a man and a woman, or through a couple, whatever the configuration is to trust. So trust is the foundation, and if there's deep trust, you can leave the other person alone. And if you leave them alone and they leave you alone, you get to experience space. And to me, the goal in a relationship between a man and a woman should be space. It's freedom, space, not all that heavy interpersonal intensity. Because heavy interpersonal intensity is like torture, right?
Yeah.
So nobody likes that heavy interpersonal intensity because it feels really horrible. It's like, ugh, I can't breathe. I got to get out of here. She's driving me crazy. He's driving me crazy, right? Right? So the way you don't have the he's driving me crazy, she's driving me crazy, is if you learn how to leave each other alone. That's my ideal. So if you're picking at each other, if you're picking at each other's faults all the time, it's not very loving.
I totally see what you're saying, but then I just find it hard to what you say, separate the two. I definitely know what you mean by picking at each other. That's terrible. But the other, it's just you want to help the other person. You want to be partners and help each other out and go farther together, and that sometimes turn into picking. So it's just, I find it really hard to
I don't think you should
help.
do that in a couple relationship. You should do, if you have other spiritual friends, you should do that with them.
Okay.
It's better you do this with your other spiritual friends and your partner does with his spiritual friends, but don't do it together.
Okay.
Then it's more clean.
That's true.
But if you're sharing a bed with somebody and then you're in each other's face, it's like, oh. It's horrible, right?
Yeah.
So to me, the goal is if you're going to sleep with someone, the idea, to me, I'm much more interested in space than I am in interpersonal intensity.
True. Me too.
So if everybody needs to grow and everybody needs to develop and we need the help from other people in order to develop, then you can get that help from your spiritual friends and your partner can get that help from his spiritual friends, but not from you.
Thank you. That was
A
helpful.
lot of people, some people say that you want to work out all of your problems and your complexes and your fears and your pathologies in your romantic and sexual with your romantic and sexual partner. I think that's insane. Because it just makes it so intense, and it's a cult of two. It's just so heavy. We can work out our problems and our confusion with other people who we don't sleep with. Then it's much cleaner. You follow? I think. So once again, in the way that I think about it, we want the goal for being in a relationship is space, not intensity. You understand? So to me, a sign, what I look for when I'm with a couple is, do you feel, when you're with another couple, do you feel included or excluded? If the relationship is good, you should feel included, not excluded. You follow? And another thing is, do you feel at ease and very comfortable with the other two people? Or when you're with them, do you feel tense? So the goal, you should feel included, not excluded, and you should feel very relaxed, not tense. And that's a sign that everything is cool. Between them, everything is cool, no problem. And also, that means they don't have a special relationship. Because if a couple has a special relationship, you feel all this special intensity around what they're sharing, which is, to me, a big ego trip. It's kind of like, you know, the first time you have a sexual relationship and you fall in love, like if you're, I don't know, 16, 17, 18, but in Denmark you start pretty early, right? Sorry. Sorry. But in any case, let's pretend 16, 17, 18. So you know how young people think that they're the only ones that have this kind of experience, and they think the adults are so square, they have no idea what I'm experiencing. Right? Right? It's a big ego trip for adolescents. Okay, so we have, is that it?
That's it.
Okay, good, so we just have a couple more minutes. What was your question?
My question was that I once heard you say in a video that as human beings we're very conditioned. What I feel is that when we live in this time, in this postmodern time, we're not even in contact with how conditioned we are. How do we get in contact with that?
Well, I don't think that's true. I think we are aware of how conditioned we are. The more educated a person is, the more aware we are of conditioning. But remember, conditioning is the nature of reality. So one of the very interesting things about the beginning of the universe is when matter appeared, you know, atoms and molecules assumed a certain formation. So there's a structure. What's very interesting about the creative process is that structure was there from the very beginning. It wasn't random. And the question is, why? So at the material level, there was structure there from the beginning. The minute matter appeared, there was structure. So the structure at the level of matter, the structure at the level of biology, right? Organic structures, biological structures. And also with the emergence of mind, there are psychological structures. So conditioning are just patterns. So conditioned patterns, which is the nature of manifest reality from matter to life to mind. So the conditioning, which are pattern structures, is not bad or wrong. That's the nature of reality, what holds reality together. The issue with conditioning is we become more enlightened, more aware when we're aware of the patterns and structures that make up reality. So for example, if you're a cosmologist is very aware of the patterns and structures that give rise to the material cosmos. And when you hear a cosmologist talk about the nature and structure of the universe, it's amazing when he or she describes the conditioned patterns and structures that make up the universe, the cosmos. And when you hear a biologist speak about the structures and patterns of biological life and how they work together, it's objectively very fascinating to see how nature works. Right? Nature's a miracle. And when you, as we learn about the structures of mind, the conditioned structures and patterns of the mind, it's also very fascinating and amazing to see how it works. And as we're learning more about the cosmos, as we learn more about biological life, as we learn more about mind, we learn more about these patterns and these structures, which together make up the sum total of manifest reality. So the issue is, there's nothing wrong with conditioning, because conditioning are just patterns and structures. But the issue is, we become more aware, more enlightened, the more we are aware of the patterns and structures that condition us to see the world in the way that we do. So if an ignorant person, a foolish person, thinks the way they see reality, the way reality shows up to them, is the way reality is. They have no idea that different human beings see reality differently because the way their mind is conditioned to see and perceive reality is very different. If you come from a small village in Somalia, the way reality is going to show up and appear to you is going to be very different than if you grow up in Copenhagen. The way you see reality, the way reality will appear to you will be very different because of the way your mind has been conditioned. So reality is not the way we see it. Reality appears to us in the way it does because of the way we have been conditioned, because of the way our culture has interpreted it. And as culture evolves, right, from ethnocentric to mythocentric to world-centric, when it goes from traditional to modern to postmodern, we learn how, through including more disciplines of interpretation, we learn how to see more of reality. We actually are able to see more of what exists, which is amazing, isn't it? So the process of enlightening ourselves is endless, because we can always see more and understand more of the patterns and conditioned patterns and structures that make up reality. And so there's nothing wrong with the conditioning. It's just that a very ignorant person has no idea that they're conditioned. They think the way I see reality is real. A fundamentalist, right? A fundamentalist Christian, a fundamentalist Jew, a fundamentalist Muslim, a fundamentalist Nazi thinks reality is how I see it and you're all wrong. That's madness. And you go to the other extreme, if you're an enlightened person and you're also a sophisticated thinker, because there are enlightened people in the Eastern sense of enlightenment, the awakening to consciousness, that aren't very sophisticated. Culturally, they might not be very sophisticated, but at a level of consciousness, they may be very enlightened. So their thinking may be very simple, which means even though they have enlightened awareness, they don't have the capacity to embrace complexity, nuance, and subtlety. So in order to embrace complexity, nuance, and subtlety, we need a level of intellectual and philosophical sophistication. So enlightened awareness at the level of consciousness is not enough to make someone a really wise person. Enlightenment involves awakening to consciousness, this going from relative to absolute. So awakening to this depth dimension that we were speaking about, that's one dimension. And the other is developing this capacity of mind to embrace subtlety, complexity, and nuance. To embrace complexity. And that requires intellectual sophistication. A lot of people say, it's this or it's that. You say, no, it's not that simple. When you become a more sophisticated person, you realize there's a lot of complexity in reality, in human beings, in the world. And really smart people are able to embrace a lot of complexity, a lot of subtlety, and a lot of nuance. And enlightened awareness doesn't do that for you. Intellectual sophistication is not a gift of enlightened awareness. That needs to be cultivated. You have to remember that there were Japanese Zen masters in World War II from Japan who supported the totalitarian fascist movement of the Emperor of Japan. Did you know that? There were Zen masters who in their own tradition were considered to be enlightened men who supported the totalitarian fascist ambitions of the Emperor of Japan. Why? because their consciousness was completely conditioned by this, by the ethnocentric tendencies of the Japanese people. So it's very complicated business. No easy answers. So we have to make the effort to become enlightened people, to awaken to consciousness, to awaken to this depth dimension, right? And we actually have to make the effort to become intellectually sophisticated. Learn about philosophy, learn about integral philosophy. In this teaching is about awakening to this depth dimension, but awakening to the depth dimension is the foundation. We also have to learn about evolution, learn about an evolutionary worldview. In this teaching of evolutionary enlightenment, embracing and understanding, but embracing an evolutionary worldview, which takes a long time, 10 years, to really embrace it at a deep level, to really internalize the truth that we're part of a creative process that's going somewhere. So we see the world as everything's moving. We're moving. Most people don't see evolution, they see a static world because they have not internalized the truth of evolution. So when they look around, they see a static world. When I look around, I see everything's moving. But that's taken me a long time. And we also want to learn about integral philosophy of Ken Wilber and John Gebser and Aurobindo and other thinkers who understand that who have understood that everything in reality relates to everything else in reality. We want to try and understand through integral philosophical ideas how does the universe how does the material universe interact with the biological universe? How does that interact with the mind and the dimension of consciousness? How does it all fit together? And we want to learn more and more about how everything fits together. And it's an endless process. There's no end to it. It's like, oh, now I've got the enlightenment part. Now I've got the intellectual part. It's just we have to stay in this and continue to develop. Right? Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.